You are watching the Love and Money podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, Marsay Winder, and he is a family man. He's a full time engineer, he's a pastor, and he is a real estate investor. Thank you for being on the show, Marsay.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, I'd like to start out by asking you to tell us who you are and what do you do?
All right, cool. Yeah, so I am, like you mentioned, I'm an engineer. I'm a father of three. I've been married for 17 years now, going on 18. Three kids, Karis, Caitlin, Jaden. I am a full-time pastor as well. So I split my time between doing pastoral duties at my local church, doing engineering. I'm an engineering manager at a local manufacturing company. And then I invest in real estate. So I've been investing in real estate now for about 3.5 years. I've got 9 properties now. About 27 doors. So a lot of my properties are multifamily, small multifamily, duplexes and quadplexes and things like that. But like I mentioned, I'm from Virginia, live in the Hampton Roads area, which is not far from Virginia Beach. And I've been here my whole life. So this is where I call home.
Okay, you got a lot going on. You've been
A
married
little.
for a long time, too. So, Marsay, can you tell us about your first deal and how you got started?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, just kind of give you a little bit of background. My dad is a general contractor. And so I grew up, kind of around construction. And, he started to buy a few real estate, deals over the years. He would be doing jobs and things like that. So he would come across stuff and he kind of implanted into me and my brother to, save money, build wealth and own stuff. And so I bought my first deal, like I mentioned, about 3.5 years ago. It was a quadplex, and it needed a little bit of work. So I bought it from a wholesaler. And fortunately, I was able to buy the deal because I had built up a lot of equity in my primary residence. So my dad, being a general contractor, he passed on a piece of land to me, and he said, "Hey, look, you know, you can have this piece of land, but under one condition, and that is that you can never sell it." So we took that piece of land and we built a house on it. Him and I, just nights and weekends, built the house, got it all finished up. So I had a lot of equity in it. So what I did was I put a home equity line of credit on that house, then took that money and paid cash for my first quadplex. And I spent about 65,000 on it. And then I put some money into it, kind of upgraded it, and just raised the rents over time. It's actually, to this day, it's my still number one performing property out of all 9 that I own. So yeah, that first one, like I mentioned, it had a little bit of work I put into it. A few years later, I refinanced it, pulled most of my money back out of it, and just you put it back to work on the next deal.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you about that, where you got the financing from, because um, that's usually like the hardest step people are trying to
Yeah,
figure out.
real estate, financing is the hardest barrier point to entry. But I tell people all the time, don't let that stop you. There are first time home buyer programs. You can do something we call house hacking, where you buy a 4-bedroom house. If you're single or young, you can buy that 4-bedroom house and rent out, 3 rooms in it. You live in the other room, and then somebody else is paying that mortgage off for you. You stay there for at least a year. You can then go and move and do that same thing again. So we're talking zero money down or 3% down for your first property. Very doable for most of us, especially nowadays when we're getting stimulus checks and things like that.
Okay. As far as the financing, I listen to Bigger Pockets sometimes, and they talk about the birth strategy. And
Yep.
so, since you've already done it, like for a beginner real estate person, like after you buy your property, how do you get your money back and buy the next property?
So basically, it really just kind of depends on how you're structured. If you're buying a property in your own name, most banks are going to make you wait for what they call a seasoning period. So that could be anywhere from 6 months upwards to a year. For most of them, it's at least a year. So once you buy that property and, rent, basically, and BRRRR stands for buy, rent, buy, rehab rather, rent it out, refinance it, and then repeat. So once you do the rehab process, it's all about getting the tenants in there, get it stable, have leases in place. Then you go to the bank, and refinance that property out. And then if you've bought it right and you have, what I use, what we call a 70% rule. So what that means is that I want to buy the property 70% below the ARV or after repair value, including all of my repairs. If I do that, then that means that the bank is gonna give me 25% of the ARV. So if I have $100,000 house, they'll put a note on it for 75. So if I bought it right and rehabbed it right, I get all of my money back after a year, and then I get to go do it all over again. So Burr is the most efficient, probably the most efficient way to invest in real estate. It just takes patience and time. Is really what I usually tell people. Did
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So, so Marseille, as far as getting into real estate as a business, is it a forgiving business?
I would say it is. I think the big part of real estate is you're going to mess up, you're going to make mistakes. What I tell people is, find a mentor, and because there's somebody else who's already done what you're trying to do.
Mhm.
And I think real estate is forgiving over time. And what that means is, if you buy a property that doesn't cash flow, and when you pay it off, it ultimately will. But
Okay.
most people can't afford that. You can't afford to have one house where you're losing money and paying for that every single month. If you've got five houses and you have one that's losing money, it's a whole different scenario. So what I usually tell people is for that first deal, you want to make sure you buy right. There's a saying, a common saying amongst real estate investors in that you make your money when you buy. So if you buy a house and you're hoping that it's going to appreciate over time, and that's going to be where you make your money, then you're gambling, right? You're speculating with real estate. But if you buy that property and you know it's going to give you $300 a month in cash flow, and you're saving money for a rainy day, like every single month, you get that $300 cash flow, and you don't go and try to spend it all. You just kind of reinvest it, and then you have an AC go out or whatever, then you can cover that. It's the same with just general finances. You got to put away cash reserves and stuff like that. But I would say that real estate is forgiving if you use some basic principles. If you just go out and you're like, I'm going to buy the first house that I find, then it might not be so forgiving to you. But if you have somebody look over your deal with you, you share it with other people, and they say, "Yep, your numbers make sense. You're buying a property that's not going to be a money pit." Then I think from that standpoint, it's a pretty safe investment.
Okay. So you would say it's pretty safe, but you make sure your numbers are working and it's cash flowing.
You got to know your numbers, absolutely, and it's forgiving. I mean, even when you have vacancies and tenant issues and stuff like that, you will recover. I think the only unforgiving part of real estate is when you buy a bad deal. But if you buy a good deal and you have tenant issues or you have maintenance issues, those things are okay. Those things are you're able to overcome those things.
Okay. Speaking of bad deals, how do you know you have a bad deal?
So the first thing about a bad deal is the number, right? And there's some basic principles behind it, in terms of cash flow. And you got to be able to estimate what your expenses are. You got to be able to estimate what your income is going to be. And if your income exceeds your expenses by a decent enough margin, you're okay. But if you are making some what I call bad assumptions to say, all right, in my market, typically the rents are $1,000 a month, but for some reason, this property, I'm going to say it's going to make $1,300 a month. That's a bad assumption, right? You want to make your assumptions conservatively. So I think a bad deal is going to be something that's going to require a lot of unknown maintenance. If you buy a really old house and you walk into it and the floor is creaking and leaning, and the house just looks like it looks like just a place where it's too many more questions than answers, that could be a bad deal for you. Or if the person selling you the house is telling you, "Oh, I never had any problems. The tenants always pay their money on time," and they're just trying to get out of it really quick.
Mhm.
It's a saying that fools rush in. So if you rush into a deal without doing your homework and what we call due diligence, then that could be a bad deal. But I think you really want to just do all your research, ask a lot of good questions, check things with the city, make sure there's not any, malicious work being done on the property, and make sure you're not in a terrible neighborhood. Those kind of things can kind of steer you away from making a bad deal.
Okay, that makes sense. Marseille, what advice would you give to a brand new real estate investor who has never bought a property but would like to start buying real estate?
So what I would tell the first, and when you're getting started, I'll tell you the same thing that I did myself. And that was, I took 6 months and I just read everything I could. Like you mentioned, watching the Bigger Pockets podcast. I watched tons of podcasts. I read tons of books. Every time I listen to an interview and they reference their favorite books, I went and I bought that book and I read it. And on top of it, so I think the education is key. Getting that time to really dig into the education side, to read, to learn, and then also to network, right? Go and find people who are already doing it. The nice part about real estate is that this is not something, there's things like Bitcoin and crypto, which are more complicated and people don't understand. But
Mhm.
real estate is simple. When it comes down to buying an investment property, a single family house or a duplex or a triplex, that's not that's not overly complicated. Those are things that are learnable in a short amount of time. So I would tell that person, really invest in your education. It's not about going to get your real estate license, but read books. YouTube is free. Bigger Pockets is free. Podcasts like this are free. And then network and find people who are already doing it. And then ask them, hey, can I just meet you at your property one day and ask you questions? If you need me to clean up, you need me to paint, I'll do it, or whatever it takes. That's how you learn. And what you'll find is that people who are already doing it, they're willing to actually help you out.
Okay, that sounds good. Speaking of books, what are some book recommendations and what are you reading now?
Oh man. So I'm a huge fan of Audible. So I have an Audible account and I just keep stuff on steady rotation through. But what I would say, just probably the most fundamental book I think that people should read is Rich Dad Poor Dad. A lot of folks know about that book, but it's a little cliche, but it's a mindset book. So I think Rich Dad Poor Dad is a great book. And then on top of that, there's also a book called, and actually it's called Mindset. It's by a lady named, I think her name is Carol Dweck. And Mindset is a powerful book because what it talks about is having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And a growth mindset basically says, hey, everything in this world is teachable. I can learn any skill, I can learn any trait, I can learn any concept. But a fixed mindset will say, well, I'm not good at talking to people. Or it'll say, I'm not good at numbers or math, or I'm terrible at the construction side or the negotiation side. So those things that, that book really kind of just breaks down the difference and helps to empower you to kind of go and attack the things that you're not really, really good at. Because with time and focus, you can pick up anything. But, those are two really good books that are out there. And then in terms, I guess, of what I'm reading now, man, I got so many different things I'm going through right now. I'm really focusing on negotiation strategies.
Oh, that's
Um,
good.
been kind of working through a lot of negotiation stuff, just trying to understand, how to create value in a deal. Because after a while, we're in a seller's market right now. So things that are just through a real estate investor are hard to come by, and everybody wants to buy that property. So I have to go and create deals and figure out what a person's motivation is, figure out how to build rapport with them, and actually create deals in an off-market space. So I'm doing a lot of stuff in negotiation. I read books like Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, Negotiation Genius. What is the other one? Getting to Yes. Just all sorts of just negotiation in mind books to understand that how the human mind works and stuff like that.
Okay, that sounds good. So Marcy, I just have one last question is, can you share something with us that you've learned about real estate that maybe was a mistake that you can help other people avoid?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I got more mistakes than I probably got successes. But in terms of mistakes, one of the things that really stuck with me early on was, so I had a deal where it was actually a house where I was going to rent out the individual rooms, and I was just talking to other investors in the area, and they were like, "Yeah, in this city you can do five." Well, I bought the house with the assumption I could do five, and I actually paid a little bit more than I would have because I just knew the cash flow was great. So when I ran my numbers, I was going to be making like $1,300 a month in cash flow. Well, lo and behold, I bought the property, I was getting ready, started getting people in there. And then the city inspector came and said, hey, you can't have, I think I had four people at the time. They said, hey, you can only have three. And I was like, what do you mean? So come to find out, I can only have three people in that property. And, I went back and talked to some other investors and they're like, oh, we didn't know that. Or, they're like, well, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. Well, I'm the property pastor. I can't be a person of, malicious intent. So I had to, bump it down to three people. And what it taught me was, hey, do your homework, do your own due diligence. Don't take what anybody says for the gospel, you have to go and do your own research, because at the end of the day, it's your business. So for me, fortunately, out of that deal, I mean, I was still able to cash flow. It just went from a home run hit to just being like maybe a first base hit. So for me, the lesson out of it was, do your homework. Don't just listen to what people say. Even if somebody does tell you something, you still want to do your due diligence and make sure that that's actually true. You want to see it in writing. You want to do your actual homework and follow up. But that's one thing that stuck with me, especially when I was doing something new. If I'm doing kind of a new deal, I need to go and make sure I know all of the pieces of it before I jump into it.
Okay. Marsay, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
So I am on, let's see, I'm on Facebook under the Property Pastor. I'm on IG. You can find me as the Property Pastor there. The YouTube channel where I drop different videos that I go over the deals that I'm doing, mindset stuff. I go over some of the just basic tools and tips for new beginning real estate investors, like how to calculate your cash flow, how to estimate deals and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm on pretty much all the major social media platforms. So if you search under the Property Pastor, I'm pretty easy to find because it's kind of a unique handle. So most people can find me that way.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for being on the show, Marshay.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me.